Hey, what's up, everybody? Shawn here, Automate to Win. Just wanted to drop this in. This is my first webinar that I ever did. Super thanks to Deborah and to Sophie and to Jeremy, Convert.com, for having me. We kind of get into the weeds a little bit about AI, how to use automation within the experimentation program, within conversion rate optimization. Listen to the guys talk about what they need to do within the first 90 days. And I just kind of showed up talking about systems and whatnot. Link in the description below for the sheet that you get if you're looking to learn how to put GPT and whatnot into sheets. It's a pretty cool conversation, hour long, nothing too crazy. Like I said, first one I ever did, so I'm kind of proud of it. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for supporting me. We out here. Hit that bell, like, subscribe, all the things I'm supposed to say. Thanks, man. We out here. Automate to win. Let's go.
Alrighty. Okay. So, thank you very much for joining me today. I am very excited to be here. I say that every time, but it's true. So today we are talking about going from Google Optimized to paid platform tests. And we know that you're going to choose your Google Optimized alternative. So we're hoping it's a step forward in your testing platform. But today we're not going to help you pick the alternative. We trust that there's lots of information out there. We've got great information about that, and you'll make the choice that's right for you. Today, we're going to dig deep on exploring how you can experiment better in your new platform. And we'll be covering topics like test planning and prioritization, how to properly use KPIs to align tests, and of course, how automation can elevate your experimentation platform. I am super pleased to be joined today again by Deborah O'Malley, who's going to be our wonderful moderator. She's from Guess the Test, and she is also a published author of 6 peer-reviewed journal articles in this domain, and she's also an adjunct professor at Queen's University. Next up, we have Jeremy Epperson, who has very deep knowledge in starting CRO programs from scratch. His bio says 185, but I think probably now it's over 200. He's got proven processes to drive ROI, and he's currently the Chief Growth Officer at Conversion Advocates. Next up, we've got Sophie Buonassisi, who is a data-driven growth leader, and don't we love the data around here? She leverages continuous conversion improvements, and she's now the VP at Spiralyze. Last but not least, we have Shawn David, who is on a mission to help you automate and get control over your days and workflows. And he is the founder of Automate to Win. So without further ado, Deborah, it's over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Morgan. I'm very excited about today because we're going to have a really lively and hopefully interactive discussion about what it means to optimize optimization. And when I say interactive, I mean you, audience listening right now, we want you to chime in. We want you to turn off your microphone if you're comfortable and ask questions, and certainly put questions in the chat anytime you want, because we want to be addressing those in real time on the spot. The goal of the webinar is not only to talk about optimizing optimization, but also to provide you with really practical, highly actionable advice that you can immediately apply to your testing practice. So with that goal in mind, panel, let's dig in. I want to start with talking about Google Optimize. It's kind of an unavoidable topic these days. If you haven't heard, surprise, surprise, Google is Optimize sunsetting. And now all us experimenters are left with having to scramble to find new alternatives. And we could talk for days about alternatives and how to choose the best alternative. But I think there's an even more crucial question behind that. And that is another free platform a good idea, or does it just water down maturity and the progression of the experimentation field? So that's one question. The second question that is encapsulated in that is, with Google Optimize going away, a free platform, we're now going more towards a paid model. How are experimenters going to ensure that we're running better tests to make testing actually worthwhile? And Sophie, I think you have some really important perspective on this, because you're working at the optimization agency Spiralyze. I happen to know some firsthand knowledge. I used to work at Spiralyze, so I happen to know Spiralyze was, at least until recently, running a whole bunch of tests for their clients on Google Optimize. That model is now completely shifting with Google Optimize and free platforms going away. And so I'm really wondering from you, Sophie, how is this affecting, in your experience, experimentation at Spiralyze and for an agency? And what are you going to be doing in lieu of free alternatives to make testing worthwhile for clients?
Yeah, it's a great question, Deborah. And you're correct. You do have that firsthand knowledge. That September date is fast approaching, right? So everyone's looking for different solutions. So at Spiralyze, the sunset of Google Optimize has actually minimally affected our program. Reason being is because we always include option of a testing platform with our engagements, just helps align with our month-to-month contracts. Previously, that was Google Optimize. Now what we're doing is simply paying for a solution. So that cost comes out of Spiralyze, but from the actual service perspective, it is uninterrupted. The goal of this is really to empower companies to be able to build an experimentation program, to be able to showcase the ROI with as little friction as possible. And overall, if anything, I believe the sunset for Google Optimize has actually positively impacted our organization, because it has really shone a light on the power of experimentation. So now companies have an understanding of the importance. They have to do their due diligence and research into solutions, which is fantastic. So overall, I think it's a really good thing. There are free testing plans out there, right? But they do have parameters on traffic allocation to be able to use them. So it's accessible still for small companies, but if you're outside of those parameters, you do have to go for a paid solution. And ultimately, I think that's a great thing, because it maintains the accessibility of experimentation for smaller companies, while also giving that little nudge towards companies that do have enough traffic to invest in experimentation, right?
Okay, that's really interesting to hear. So it's actually progressing the maturation of the experimentation programs, and it's not having much of a downside at all. Jeremy, you have probably a similar, but I imagine a slightly different experience, also having your own agency, Conversion Advocates. Tell us about what you feel about this sunset.
Yeah, I think I agree with Sophie on a couple things, and I have a couple extra comments to add too. So I don't think the cost of the technology is the barrier to adoption. I think this entire progression we're going through right now is just raising more awareness, which helps all of us, kind of push for a higher adoption of experimentation. So I love that aspect of it. Here's what I've seen in the last 15 years, technology for analytics, for research tools, for A/B testing tools, has advanced much faster than the process, the team, the skills around experimentation. So I think this is just a catalyst for us to get in front of more people, explain the value of experimentation. And the cost is incremental. If you think in terms of like headcount and the amount of people it takes to like run a high performing experimentation program, it really shouldn't be a barrier. It's kind of a silly conversation to be having, right? It's like, hey, we're going to put 4, 5, 6 fractional people, like cobble them together in an experimentation team, but we're worried about X cost per month. So I love that it's raised a lot of awareness, but I think the bigger issues we need to look at moving forward when we get past the technology aspect of this is like really focusing on like the skills, the process, like the team building, like how we actually execute against experimentation with the team.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you find that there's now a higher barrier to entry with just the whole shift towards everything going towards a paid model?
No, not necessarily. I think our approach from like a consulting side of things is obviously, like Sophie said, we want to minimize the friction points to get them started. And that's been my whole career, right? And everybody kind of knows that. Like we help companies get started with experimentation when they've never done it before. So we have to put all the pieces in place. So any way you can reduce that friction, I think is helpful. But it really shouldn't be an issue in the scheme of things. When you look at the ROI potential of experimentation, it's such a item against a marketing budget that I think it gets overplayed, and I think it doesn't really make rational sense versus the upside potential. So those are the type of things that I try to explain to our clients or people that I interact with in the industry.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually really optimistic. It's part of optimizing optimization is making it just more accessible for more people. Shawn, you have an interesting perspective. Up until recently, you were with Spiro, which everyone knows runs tons of tests for people. And now you've started your own firm, Automate to Win, and you're looking specifically at how to automate things in order to get, wins and test wins. What are your thoughts on the sunsetting of Google Optimize and barriers to entry versus making it more accessible for people?
Honestly, I don't think that's going to make any difference whatsoever. I think this conversation that's happening right now, the fact that I'm on this webinar with people that have a lot of history in the experimentation world, and we're looking at how is this going to change things, how are systems going to change, is the conversation that we need to have. Because honestly, we have no idea what's coming down the pipe for websites, for online marketing, any of that. But we do know that it's going to be some sort of way integrated with a large language or some other sort of generative AI, right? So if you get ahead of that now, and if you look at Optimize as like your entry point into experimentation, you're failing at the very beginning, because you're looking at a tool instead of a theory. So if you think because it's a free tool that you can now all of a sudden run an experimentation program, like, you're failing from the very beginning. So it doesn't really matter, right? Now, if there is something to be said, if you pay for something, now you're going to have, sunken cost, and you're going to start putting value into it because now you paid for it and you need to use it. But at the same time, all you need to do is just start having conversations with the AI, build the AI, and then ask it questions and just be like, hey, how do I do this? So if you can't afford Jeremy, for instance, right? There are people out there that just can't afford him. That's fine. He doesn't need to work with them because they can't afford him. He is a genius at what he does. You can't afford Spiralyze. Fine. If you can't afford Convert, you probably can. But if you can't, there's ways that you can move and make tools using the AI. You don't have to be coders. You don't have to even understand what code is. Like, we are in the position now where you can have a conversation with every person who's ever developed anything in the history of humans, and you can come back and get a solution for you. So it's like, anyone that says, like, what's the barrier of entry? The barrier of entry is your willingness to do this, like your willingness to even jump into it, your willingness to say, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to understand what experimentation marketing is. Like, instead of just looking at it and saying, I'm going to plug this tool in and then I'm going to start running A/B tests. Like, that never was going to work in the first place. If you paid $1 million for the tool, or it was free. Okay. So at the end of the day, does it matter to me? No. Like, you're going to have a system to run, or you're not. What tool you use is irrelevant.
Right. Okay. So the willingness to find a way, really, and there's so many options now, especially with AI. That makes a lot of sense. So all three of you seem fairly aligned on this. This is actually a really optimistic turning point in the industry. It's drawing more attention to it. It's opening opportunities for experimenters, for new clients. And from Shawn's perspective, it's allowing the integration of more powerful tools and potentially AI technologies into it. Audience, I'd love to hear from you, your perspective, how this is affecting you, how you're dealing with it. Type into the chats, or if you're brave enough, turn on your microphone and speak your voice. This is your opportunity to get involved and tell us what you're thinking. So we've talked about tools. Now I think we need to talk about process a little bit. One of the hallmarks of a mature testing program is a strong test planning and prioritization system. And I know that this is really key in order to set up tests that actually succeed. What, in your opinion, are the top 3 best ways to ideate and to prioritize and to plan an experimentation process? And Jeremy, because you've run so many experiments in your lifetime, I'd love to hear from you and your real world experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that both Shawn and Sophie are going to go through some of the more technical kind of quantitative aspects. So I'm going to throw in a couple, kind of concrete things that I think help with prioritization. So there are 2 questions that can disqualify a test right off the bat and help you get closer to what you're trying to accomplish with experimentation within the next 90 days. So we always, I'm pretty heavy-handed with promoting 90-day growth plans. Like, we need to have a focus. You cannot fix everything within one quarter. If you're trying to fix retention and first-time customer acquisition and average order value, and if you're a lead gen site and you're trying to solve for 4 different metrics, that creates a big mess. You need enough time to be able to get traction with testing, to be able to make progress against the problems you're trying to solve. So the 2 things that we do that disqualify a test, if you can just disqualify bad tests, your results are automatically going to get better, right? So that's the kind of methodology behind this. So one is, does this improve the KPI that we're focusing on in this 90-day growth plan? So you can backlog a test and run it a quarter from now, and it could be a totally different KPI you're focusing on. So that is really helpful to keep your focus and make sure you build momentum. The second thing is, does this test teach you something about your business, your strategy, your product, your marketing, or most importantly, your customers? If you don't get a game-changing strategic insight from the test that you're running, you should reconsider why you're testing and how you're testing, because pulling a form field off of a page is not going to be the difference between, growing your business 100% over the next year versus like a couple UX tweaks, right? So we want to elevate people up to strategic testing. It's going to drive more value and more insights.
That's really interesting. So it's all about the KPI, which could be increased conversion rates, but you want to have those bigger swing, more meaningful test impacts that are really going to change the business. It's not just about increasing a small conversion rate by removing a form field, for example. It's about the overarching business model and how to optimize that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we have a prioritization framework that's like proprietary for us. We analyzed the metadata of 5,000 experiments that I've run for different companies, and we looked for the factors that are going to lead to a higher probability of a winning test. In this format, I'd never be able to explain all of that, obviously, but I do have an entire rundown of that on my triple-digit growth trainings, and it's literally 45 minutes long, kind of working through it. But I also know that like Sophie and Shawn have some like pretty interesting things to share about that. So like, I'll let them tackle that kind of.
That sounds amazing. Well, Sophie, I'd like to turn to you, because I know, again, from working at Spiralyze and helping contribute to planning and prioritization frameworks for clients, you have a really good system in place, and it's pretty foolproof at this point. Tell us more about it.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, Jeremy, about different types of tests and really understanding, what to look at. Does it improve a KPI in 90 days? Does it give us a strategic insight? Those are super, super important focal points. A big part of getting started that we emphasize and prioritize at Spiralyze is showcasing immediate bottom line growth impact. So we work predominantly with B2B companies. So pipeline is a massive, massive factor, or even revenue if they have the attribution data to go to revenue or even ACV. Pipeline is the most common. So we really aim to focus within the first 90 days on pipeline growth. That way we can prioritize and showcase value and layer on the really strategic ones after that, after proving out some value of testing and showcasing it internally. Oftentimes there's a lot of different kind of mindset, cultural shifts within an organization that need a little bit of promotion around testing to get on board. So this is really helpful for that. A more tactical way of approaching that, for example, as part of that prioritization framework, same kind of thing. I don't think I can go through it in entirety, but really key elements of it are at the first kind of starting point. Where are the kind of direct conversion points occurring on the website that are leading to high quality pipeline and revenue? And then what's the customer journey to get there? So think of those as assist pages. We get this data from Google Analytics. You can simply segment, look at that customer journey, and always look at what's driving pipeline at the end of the day, because often getting started, it's tempting to look at where do we have the most traffic? Where are our lowest conversion rates? But if we really want to prioritize as a framework pipeline growth within the first 90 days, we need to be looking and kind of backwards deconstructing that funnel from pipeline. So that's a really good point there. And then we want to prioritize the direct conversion points that have the highest intent first and foremost, and build out across that customer journey to be able to create and showcase the greatest pipeline growth. That will enable you, once you are able to showcase that, to then build upon the program and get really strategic too.
That makes a lot of sense. And it really speaks also, Sophie, to what you're talking about with Google Optimized sunsetting. You were saying, like, this opens opportunities. It's not so much about a free program going away. It's about being able to open opportunities for the clients that you're serving. And by prioritizing the pipeline, you're really doing that. You're making the opportunities just really efficient. They're going to be there right away. So that makes a lot of sense.
And one thing too is, I mean, we have oftentimes finite traffic and resources, right? And Jeremy made a really good point about resources, and Shawn actually about how that's super important. So with those finite resources, to be able to prove value within the first 90 days of an experimentation program, super important. We need to be running the highest impact tests possible.
For sure. Shawn, you were with Spiro for a long time. You saw and contributed to a lot of planning and prioritization frameworks. And now with your own company, Automate to Win, you've actually developed your own automated planning and prioritization framework. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Look, I just like to go by math. It's what it is. So the sheet that you'll get for visiting this website, this webinar today, you have the ability to do sample size, segment size, MDA based in it. So you add your current conversion rate, your expected conversion rate, your significance, your power. It's going to give you your segment size, your sample size. If you don't have that, you can't do it. Is what it is. You're also going to be able to run current traffic, get your MDE, so you can determine what's the minimal detectable effect that I actually can do this, right? So at the end of the day, if you can get to statistical significance, yeah, that's a hard word. If you can do that, then great. But going into this and thinking that you can't run tests because you don't have traffic, or you can't run user research and get information about your ICP to start building things. I don't want anyone to go into this and say, well, I don't have 95,676 people. For instance, I'm looking at this thing right now. My current conversion rate is 5%, expected conversion rate 6%, at 95% significance, 80 power. You need 95,676 people. That's what you need. If you don't have that, you won't. The math doesn't line up. Now the priority model, it's just a model, all right? Like the one that you're going to get in this form, it's just based on questions, and it's just basically says, are dev resources available? Do you have the traffic to support it? Do you have research that says this is a good idea? Do you have clear goal tracking? And is this something that's transformative, right? And then coefficient for difficulty, like through that's all you need. Like take pi, take ice, whatever priority model that you want, take it, use it. The best one is one that you use. So the sheet that you get at the end of this, it's going to have one baked into it. You can use that going straight ahead. Like you have the ability to answer questions in a Google form. Those questions, yes or no, will then auto prioritize your ideas. Don't take that as like, this is the way. Like none of these are right. None of these are wrong. Like, but it is one that you can use, and it's one that if you do use it, it will help you. So if you have no idea how to prioritize things, if you're looking at this and you're saying, man, I don't even understand the first step, this is it. This allows you to look at it and just answer simple questions. And it's the first step in understanding how to prioritize your experimentation. It's not going to work for everybody. It's probably not going to work, for most people. But as long as you can understand how it works and what the theory is, you're good. You're fine. You take this and you jump off, and then you go have a conversation with the two other people or Spiro or anybody, because now you know what you're talking about. Now you're going into the situation and you're saying, hey, I generally understand what you do. I generally understand that I'm not good at it. And I generally understand that what you do has value and I'm willing to pay for it, because there's too many times the first 90 days is just educating on what it is that they do. And that's not helping anybody. If you're going into the situation, you just don't even understand what experimentation is in the first place, you're setting yourself up for failure. So before you even take a meeting with literally anybody, it doesn't matter if it's a tool, if it's anything, like understand the concept. What is this? What are we doing? And if you don't have a way to prioritize the ideas and have observations and start doing research and talking to customers, it's never going to work. It's just never going to work. You need the foundation. And that's like what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get you to a point where you look at this and you're like, I'm no longer lost. I have from 0 to 1 is the hardest thing to do. And once you're from 1 to 1,000, that's easy. Like that's just steps. But when you look at a blank piece of paper, what experimentation, all these people and all these blog posts are telling you, install this, go this, take this meeting, do this, 90 day, all, and you're just like, what? This is what you need. You need that first thing. Like, what is this? That's what I tried to build.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds really amazing. So if you stick around to the end of the webinar, we're going to share a link where Shawn has built expressly for you this planning and prioritization matrix. And Shawn, what I really hear you saying is it's not so much about the importance of planning and prioritizing. You have to get started first. That's the absolute key. And in order to get started, you need to be calculating your traffic and your numbers and make sure testing is a good fit for you. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There is a, I
And
mean,
once
if you want, I can jump just to, I'll share real quick. People want to see this. Just, I have it set up here if you want to see it. So here's what you get. Everyone sees the screen. We're good. So
Yep.
the Google Sheet, right? Everything is here. The way that this works is it starts with a form. That form allows you to pick your page, segmentation, devices, conversion goal. Now is your second point, assets, design notes, develop a reference. Here's your first prioritization question. Does it add or remove something to the page, right? And then you get what it is. Dev team notes. Another question, have we dev'd anything in the past? If we have, it's a coefficient of difficulty. It's easier to do if I've done this before. I can reference it, right? Next one, previous experiment data. If you answered yes, this opens, you can link to that test asset. Now you have your prio. So you have variant experience, exchange the user journey, goal tracking clear, research supporting it, dev resources, traffic, political reason. This is hippo. This is a coefficient. This goes, max is 11 without this, max 16 with this. Okay. From that, you go into the strategy. So you start going into short name, give it a name. Now you say, where's it in the roadmap? Adds replaces stops. This is critical. Most people don't do this because they don't think about what's coming up. You got to do it. Your hypo, your tags, principles, metric, all your stuff. All right. From that, that'll lead to here. So that's going to lead you into this sheet, all this great stuff. What happens here? You grab this status, this email. If this is checked, this will send an email. It will look like this. It'll come out and it'll say, hey, this thing has sent this status for this thing. You click on it, it'll bring you back into your sheets. Here's what I was talking about in your functions. Put in your expected conversion rate, your current conversion rate, significance, power, and there's your segment sample size. So if you have a 5% conversion rate, you want to go to a 6% conversion rate at a 95% significance at 80 power, you need 24,000 people in the segment or 95,676 people coming to your website. And however much time you want, there you go. So if that's a week, if that's 10 weeks, whatever that is. From that, you're going to be able to build a test document, okay? So the test document is going to be over yonder. You're going to come here and you're going to say test doc. There's a checkbox that says click it, come up here, create test document. It's going to create this. That is from this template and it replaces all of these things in here. So if you create test documents or test slides, you just come in here, you hit the button and it creates this. You can share this up anytime that you update in the Google Sheet. This is updated as well. So you never have to worry about updating this document. This document is literally just a presentation of the data in there. So there's never any like whatever. You just update that and this will update from itself. Okay. From that, you have AI feedback. Okay. So if you have an OpenAI key, you can come in here and you can take your hypo, grab this, and it will come back. It will rewrite your problem statement and your hypo as a null-based or however you want. So you go in, you say, hey, here's my problem, here's my hypo, rewrite it. It'll come back in and it'll say, here you go. So if you look at this, I don't make enough money. I need to learn automation to make money, right? Bullshit. But you come here and it rewrites it as I want to increase my income and automating certain tasks will increase my income. What does that do? It ties the problem statement into the hypo as best as it can because I gave it shit inputs, shit outputs. But this is here and it allows you to kind of modify what you want. The reason that that's there in the first place is so you can come in here and you can just understand how it works. You can come in here. Everything is absolutely set up for you to follow. It's commented. You'll be able to read this. If you can't read this, I can help you. But you come in here and you'll be able to change the prompt. Okay. Here's your prompt. There's a problem statement hypo for an A/B test. You're an expert in this area, blah, 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 whatever. Go play with ChatGPT, get it to a point where it's giving you the data back. You can feed it using Pinecone. You can do whatever you want, but this is the key right here. Here's the prompt to send it out. Yeah, from all that, it's all tied together, and you can just start building waterfalls off this, all kinds of automations. You can use this for, I mean, for whatever you want.
This looks
Guys,
really amazing, Shawn. Thank you so much for building this and for sharing it with us. So as I mentioned, if you stick around to the end, you get a free link to this and you can use it for all your experimentation needs. We do have a couple questions. So somebody's wondering, it works with AI and which one?
What this is ChatGPT.
Okay, so it's
OpenAI, but it'll work
framework.
with any AI. It'll work with Bard. It doesn't matter. You just, all you would need to do is just figure out the API calls for whatever AI you want and just change the functions. I mean, or you can hire me and I'll build it, whatever you want.
Okay, and Alessandro is wondering if it works with ClickUp.
Oh, I mean, sure. I mean, this is built in the Google ecosystem. I've built multiple ClickUp instances that will do similar things. Like the where it's built doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It could be an Airtable, ClickUp, Jira, Asana, Notion. It doesn't matter. I did this because I figured it's free. It's 100% free. Like if you don't have an OpenAI key, that's fine. You just no longer have the AI function. Literally everything else is absolutely free from Google. So it's, there's no zero cost.
Amazing. Okay. And then we have two questions that Shawn, you sort of spoke about, but Sophie and Jeremy, I want to open this to you as well. There are two questions really related to the same thing. One is traffic. And that is, what if you have low volume sites? Shawn mentioned you just plug in the numbers and plug and play and you're good to go. But what do we do about testing with low traffic sites? And on a similar vein, Alexandros is wondering if you're looking to scale up your experimentation program and it's small right now, but you want to grow it. What do you do to do that? What are the best solutions for that? So sort of the same question in the same vein, but two really different topics to explore. Sophie, how does Spiralyze handle this approach?
Yeah, so great questions, first of all, but low traffic is a common issue for B2B, which is what we are specialized in. So it is something that we encounter oftentimes. There's a few different really impactful ways of approaching it. Number one, take really bigger swings. So oftentimes we get fixated on, we want to make one change to be able to directly attribute it, which is best practice. However, oftentimes it will leave us in that kind of gray area of insignificance. And so what we're trying to do is kind of pair different hypotheses together in a way to create a larger impact, rolling up to the same objective. So that way it's not diluted, but making a bit of a bigger splash in terms of just testing bigger things. So that's one approach, bigger swings, bigger changes. Another approach is just having peace with that you will probably have lesser statistical significance. So measuring to a lesser kind of target confidence level, 95%. If you're not hitting statistical significance there, you're not getting statistically significant results, you might want to just continuously lower that and understand we're getting directional data. We're not necessarily getting as statistically significant as we would desire. However, it is directionally providing us feedback, which is essentially what we're looking for.
Okay,
so those are two big ways of approaching it.
That's great. And Jeremy, what's your approach?
Yeah, so something interesting that I found out in the last year is we worked with a very large data set, millions of test variations from a testing platform. And we did this big data project where we were trying to figure out if there was any correlation between level of effort in a test, like how many hours goes into building and launching an experiment versus probability to hit stat sig. And we found no correlation. So building a landing page is not necessarily going to be a bigger swing or a higher probability of hitting stat sig than a value proposition. I'm just like making up examples to show you the contrast. So what's important, whether you're a low traffic or a high traffic site, is getting closer to using research to get closer to what are the specific conversion roadblocks? What are the things that are preventing people from converting? Because the closer we get to that is the definition of a big swing if we're using that term. So if we're just randomly testing things, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You're going to have low ROI. You're going to have a lot of flat tests. So that is applicable to high traffic and low traffic sites. For low traffic sites, there are strategies from like, a stats, math, like analytics perspective. You can bucket different URLs together, test evergreen content across more pages. You can test site-wide test. There's things you can do to get the volume up that can help you with efficiency of testing. And there are some companies that just do not have the traffic to actually mathematically support running tests on a website. So in that situation, you don't just throw your hands up in the air and go, forget about it. I guess we don't want to grow our business, right? It doesn't make any sense. So what we can still use is customer data, channel data, primary research methods, quant and qual research, and we can still use like sequential data analysis to get at least a hint at what's happening. It's not testing in a vacuum. We don't recommend that for sites unless it's absolutely necessary, but I hate coming out of webinars like this and people being like, well, I guess zero doesn't work for us. You know what I mean? Because it's a very narrow view of it. And I think we need to do a better job at like helping with optimization overall and growth overall, like in the industry. So those are a couple quick things on the velocity side, which is the other end of the spectrum. If you have really high velocity, the two biggest for high traffic websites, the two biggest constraints are time and traffic. So traffic, obviously, but time is how much time can we allocate this? So the issue, the roadblock we see with testing velocity has nothing to do with like lack of test ideas usually or anything like that. It has to do with inefficiencies in the workflow, the process, and the communication around how quickly we can get tests live and how efficiently we can manage it to a weekly sprint cycle. That's what really matters. So, like when I started the Zero program with Zillow, we were running 10, 15, 25 tests per month because Zillow is an extremely high traffic site, right? So it became less of a game of, at a certain point, you're like, okay, we do need more test ideas. We do need to conduct more research. We do need to spin up more iterations. So like you run one test, the results of that are flat. That spins up 3 new hypotheses that you can run, right? So you have to build that backlog. So there's 2 kind of components to that. There's like the roadmap management and there's like the efficiencies and the workflows. Those are the 2 things we see people getting stuck on at least.
That makes a lot of sense. And it actually echoes what Sophie said, which is for Sophie and Spiralyze, their goal is filling the pipeline in the first 90 days. And for you, you're essentially saying the same thing, filling the pipeline or getting the expediency of the testing program up and running sooner and quicker with really meaningful tests, which is what you said when we talked initially about how to prioritize a testing program, is really make sure that those tests that you're running match the KPIs and are going to have heavy hitting impacts. So that brings me into another question, which is exactly about KPIs. For anyone not familiar with the term KPI, it means key performance indicator. And I like to think of it as the conversion goal. We could talk all day about what a KPI actually is and define it, but for simplicity, we'll call it a conversion goal. There's so much debate out there about how to target and how to measure KPIs and how to do it properly. And as a result, there's many different approaches. And Jeremy, I'd like to hear from you first. How specifically do you and your team go about determining the proper KPI and making sure that it's the right one for your testing needs?
Yeah, good question. So believe it or not, we see like internal teams struggle with this a lot. There are 2 components that you need to break down. One is the alignment around what you're trying to optimize for, and that's like the politics, essentially, for a lack of a better word, of like, is everyone aligned on what we're trying to accomplish here? Because I have my like 6 principles kind of framework. The first is business alignment, like strategic business alignment. If we don't get everyone aligned, then we're in trouble from the very beginning, right? So the ways we simplify this, and I mentioned this earlier, is like, let's just pick one primary KPI, one macro conversion that we're focusing on, right? That gives us a level of focus. It helps us test against just that one KPI and make progress against it. The other part of this is if you're kind of working in the trenches day to day and you're like an individual contributor, you're a marketing manager or whatever your title is within a company, and you don't have necessarily like exec level buy-in for the things you're doing, there's 2 approaches. You go to the exec team, you make your case, you go, here's the whole plan, here's the process, here's how we're launching CRO. Let's all get aligned on this. If they shoot that down, then the second sneakier way is you're going to pick off certain pages that you own or certain like URLs that you can test on, and you're going to build a little momentum. You're going to run some tests. You're going to like maybe show one winning test, and then that gives you the ability to get that buy-in you need for experimentation overall, but then also like progress against KPIs. So those are some like kind of change management, like process related things, but that can help people a lot when they're in that position.
That's really great. That's very helpful. Sophie, how about you? How do you prioritize and measure KPIs?
Actually, very similar to what Jeremy just expressed there in terms of you either get buy-in initially off the gate for starting an experimentation program, or you're building towards getting buy-in. Oftentimes, we are working with companies that fall a little bit closer to the latter, even if, for example, the marketing team is bought in. However, it hasn't disseminated throughout the entire organization. So there's always, we find some point that we're building towards in terms of strategic alignment, whether it's, working from individual contributors up to the actual kind of exec team within a marketing org, whether it's disseminating it across all cross-functional areas of the organization. Typically, there's some component to that. And a big way that we find to get a little bit more kind of focused in on how to combat that is thinking about minimum needed revenue impact. And if you are not measuring to revenue, if you don't have that attribution data, you can move up funnel, right? Pipeline. So think about what is the marketing team measured on. Ideally, we're all measuring and aligning with revenue, right? Revenue ACV. However, oftentimes marketing organizations currently we find at B2B companies are measuring to pipeline. So pick whichever aligns with your organization and think of your prioritization of, like Jeremy said, getting that sneaky buy-in around how do I showcase minimum revenue or pipeline impact to be able to make this case. And that will come down to being really intentional about tests. So thinking around what KPIs are going to get me that revenue impact. And Jeremy, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah. I was just going to piggyback on that. So like from like a data perspective, if you're looking across different macro and micro conversions, like we have a business intelligence team who works through a process with our clients where we help them isolate what is actually going to drive the most impact. Part of that is based on the ROI projections, which kind of feeds into one of our next questions. So I'll hold off on that. But yeah, there are benchmarks that exist across different verticals. Benchmarks are just a number to get a relative understanding. It's not a source of truth. It's not something that you should live or die by, but it can help you at least get an understanding. So like for an e-com business, if your, add to cart rate is only 4% versus 8% in, your particular vertical, that can be useful information, right? So we can use those aspects, but we can also look, through different analytics reports and custom reports to figure out like, where do we have the most upside potential? So we can take a data-driven approach to isolating KPIs. But again, if we're targeting this at companies that are just getting started, any form of testing versus not testing, it's going to be very easy to make the case, right? So we don't want to overthink it. We don't want to get stuck on things we don't need to get stuck on, but like pick something simple and straightforward, like work against a specific KPI. That's what's going to drive value because you can always shift the strategy later. And people don't think that. They think it's like set it and forget it. We never make changes. That's not how it actually works. So like it's about getting started. That's the important thing.
One thing that I would add here, just from a system standpoint, everything from the CRO standpoint is amazing. If you're listening to these two intelligent people speak and you don't understand what they're saying, I can help here. So use AI for this. Okay, you like when somebody says KPI metric, all these things, they mean something. There's a dictionary there. If you're just joining a system, you just joined as an input and you're like, all right, I'm a CRO person, I'm an experimentation person, I understand what this is. And you enter into an enterprise system and you need to start building a system. If your dictionary of terms and their dictionary of terms are different, if you call it a KPI and they call it a metric, if you call it an OKR and they call it a KPI, you call it a widget and they call it a doodad, you're just in trouble. So step 0 is define the terms. If you don't have those definitions, that's fine. AI can help you here. Go and talk to it. Like if you don't have
let me ask
ability,
you very concretely, because we have an audience question specifically, I think that could be related to AI. So
sure.
Alexander is wondering, he has a mobile games company and he's looking to scale up that mobile games company and looking for the best solutions. His sort of KPI is getting a self-service team or self-service tools to run the business. He's looking to train the business to analyze A/B tests.
Okay.
And he's wondering, how can you scale that and achieve self-service as the KPI using presumably automated technology. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it depends. Like now you're trying to automate out what humans are doing for you. Now, the only thing that you can do now, what I would suggest is you use large language and you use the ability to go through and identify patterns. And kind of where I led into this, you use AI to so let's say you have 10,000 days or whatever of time of Google Analytics data, right? You have optimized data or you have whatever data, GA3 data, and you don't know what to do with it. You can plug that and build your own sub GPT, build your own large language model, use Bard, use whatever. And that in itself can come back and tell you what you should optimize for. So if you have no idea what you're doing and you can't afford to go and hire someone to do like a heuristics, or you want to understand the data that you're looking at, the AI can help you with that. All you need to do is feed it in your data, tell it what it is, tell it that you are a gaming company and this is the data, this is what I want to do, give it the box that it is and ask it how to do this. The problem is people want to go to AI and they want to tell it what to do. It's not the right way. That's only going to give you what you already know and what it is in context to that. All you need to do here is give it the parameters and ask it questions. Don't tell it statements. Let it figure it out. And then you say, hey, where should I optimize? Where is my weak points? What is the, and it can come back and say, hey, you know, this segment, this data, this time, your AOV, blah, blah, blah. You'd be amazed at the level of detail that can come back. And you can take that and then you can go to the experts and you can give that to them and you can be like, here, I can't afford the 25 grand or 30 grand or whatever it costs to do an audit, but I can afford 5 grand for you to look at this AI output and tell me if it's bullshit. You know, there are ways to do this. Like they're like, don't be scared is the whole point of this. Like if you're a 1 million or 10 million or 5, it doesn't matter. Like this is the way. Like experimentation in marketing is the way for you to succeed. So if you don't know how to do it, hire one of these people or use AI. Like it's simple.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a really common thread running through all of you, although you all have really different perspectives. Get started is really the message that I'm hearing. Get started and use AI to help you. And Sophie, you talked about not only the importance of getting started and filling the pipeline with really good tests, but also making sure that it hits that KPI. Typically it's revenue because money talks. Sometimes it's something, you know, different, but generally revenue is going to be the hard-hitting metric for the client. What happens when a test doesn't win? And how do you justify a test loss? Or how do you explain to a client that a loss is not really a loss as long as you've learned something from it?
That's a great question, Deborah, and a very common one, I will say, that we get. So a loss in itself, a lot of people will look at the percentage of loss and get a little bit concerned around that. They might, you know, meet with their marketing team and get questioned around it. If we think about the test period, a loss is on 50 or whatever percentage of traffic that we're allocating that split towards. It's for a limited, finite period of time, and we can kill it anytime. So the downside is really, really small in comparison to the upside potential of testing, because we can kill tests right away. On the upside, we're scaling tests so that more of our traffic sees it and continuously over time. So the difference is super marginal. And when you think about it like that, it's quite easy to communicate and there's never any issues past that point. From a just understanding of this concept on all our QBRs, so quarterly business reviews with clients, we actually do showcase at least one loss because we want to really highlight that learning process and understanding around how to think about learning and losses. And ultimately, a loss is simply a data point. We can iterate from it. We can learn from it. And I think Jeremy said earlier, right, out of one test stems 3 additional hypotheses. So any kind of learning loss is directional data that is going to funnel us towards a more appropriate path.
And I think you made a really important point that through the very nature of testing itself, you're mitigating losses by putting it only on 50% of the traffic. So it's not really a catastrophic loss when you're not rolling it out to 100% of the traffic anyway. That is why we test. So
correct.
Really,
and I think it's a lot more challenging to try and say that first off the gate to prove value of, hey, we're going to mitigate loss. That doesn't tend to land as well as reinforcing with that. So we always go with first, we're going to grow, and always weight more of the growth aspect, but then also reinforce with, here's the risk that we're actually mitigating with.
Right. And Jeremy is saying it's not a loss, so don't call it that. There's some chatter in the experimentation community that it actually should be called a save or a savior, because you're saving yourself from rolling out that losing variant, if you will. Jeremy, you undoubtedly had had this conversation with clients and had to deal with this. How do you address so-called losses, or maybe we should call them saves, with clients, and how do you present them as learnings?
Yeah, this is like an hour webinar in and of itself. So we're going to do the Cliff Notes version of this right now. So yes, testing is a form of risk mitigation. Here's the reality. So when you've run thousands and thousands of experiments for different clients, what you realize is that no matter how great your development team is, how great your QA is, how particular you are about test monitoring and being really, really solid on your data management practices, things are going to break. Something's going to break that you don't see. Data's not going to track properly. A test is not going to be set up properly. You're going to catch issues. So there's a couple things around this. Like, we do pre-launch and post-launch QA. So we fully QA a test before it goes live to make sure it renders properly, make sure we have the right tracking in place, the data is going to be collected effectively. Even with that being the case, sometimes things break. So the faster you can catch that, the better, because that's going to mitigate the downside. You don't have to get pulled into a meeting to get browbeat about how you messed up, how you broke some certain page on the site or whatever. It's just a reality of testing. Things are going to break sometimes. And when you're moving quickly, they're going to break more often. So you have to be more diligent. So a couple things about that is, like, one is, if you see a test that's underperforming, there's a pause button in the testing platform. Literally, most of them look like a pause button. It's amazing, right? So something breaks, data isn't tracking, you pause that, you mitigate the downside, right? That's excellent. You can't do that with just pushing things live to the production site. The other part of this is the efficiency of that. So obviously, if a test is underperforming by 25% and you have at least a large enough sample size to know that, like, hey, this actually is going to have, going to suppress our conversion rate, lead revenue, then you can pause that out. And that creates efficiency in your testing queue and your testing roadmap, right? So that's tied into a separate concept, which is, there's only 3 outcomes, right? A test hits stat sig and lifting conversions, it's flat and has no meaningful impact, or it suppresses conversions, right? Each of those 3 things teaches us something valuable. Only one of them ever gets celebrated, and that's the quote unquote winning test, right? But that is so misunderstood. Flat tests are just as important, if not more important, than a winning test. The reason is you're compiling a list over time of things that either users do not see, understand, interact with, or things that they don't care about. That list is just as important. You have to have that tallied list. So you get a year into testing and you're like, here's 60 things we know people absolutely don't care about at all. Well, that's going to continue to evolve your strategy, right? When we have winning tests, people hang it up and they go, okay, we solved that problem, let's move on. No, let's continue to iterate against that, because we found something that got traction with users on a site. We should continue to explore that and see, is that the optimal solution? Or do we think it's the optimal solution and we're getting scatterbrained and just testing all over the place, right? And when we have losing tests, people shy away from that. They're afraid of it and they go, oop, we better avoid that. No, we just found something that massively shifts human behavior. You know how hard it is to shift human behavior? So if we find something that suppresses conversion rate, we know we're on to something really interesting. What if because we've captured the attention, we've altered the behavior, what if we had different variations that tested around that to be able to find a solution for this pain point that we know exists on the site, right? So it's a different mental model for how we approach things, but that's the difference between a highly effective CRO program and one that kind of flounders, because the tiny little nuances of running a CRO program, the things that I just mentioned, that defines the difference between mediocre and excellent. And those are the things that people need to be putting in place.
I love that perspective. That's a really valuable perspective. And I think a lot of people shy away from those losses. They go, oh no, I have to represent gains to the client. I have to make the testing program look good and look worthwhile. But you're saying losses are actually invaluable in moving human behavior. And that's a really interesting thing that needs to be explored more. And digging into that, you can see what is the pivotal turning point, what's motivating people to convert or not. So super, super important to address that. How do you talk about that with clients if you get, let's say, 10 really bad losing tests in a row or saving tests in a row? How do you explain that to a client and say, hey, we're actually onto something here?
Well, first of all, don't do that, because that's going to frustrate them a lot. But yeah, as far as like client management, because I've worked on the agency and consulting side, every touch point, every conversation is an opportunity to educate or re-educate people about how experimentation works. So we're very particular about that. Nothing we do is on accident. Everything's very intentional. So the conversations that you have with other stakeholders is how you're going to frame the narrative around what experimentation is. So instead of getting frustrated or being like, hey, I'm afraid to go present this because it suppressed conversion rates by X%, it's an opportunity to continue to educate, to continue to reshape the narrative of like, what are we trying to accomplish here? So it's about training, team enablement. It's about education. The standard kind of baseline knowledge for experimentation is extremely low in the industry, which is really frustrating after 15 years. But also that gives us a platform to be able to educate people and give them the right expectations. So I think that's a big part of it. As far as 10 losing tests in a row, that is just another feedback mechanism. If you have 10 flat tests in a row, if you have 10 losing tests in a row, it's a feedback mechanism that plays into how you are managing your roadmap moving forward. And, you know, there's a lot of politics around that, but, you know, if you have, let's say 10 flat tests in a row, we're not creating meaningful tests, right? We're not creating experimentation variations that are actually going to help people like convert or give them a better experience. So we need to go back to the drawing board, and maybe we need more research, or maybe we need to change the strategic approach, or, you know, we have to take this as just different inputs in a feedback loop that are constantly evolving on a week over week sprint cycle.
That's amazing. Such valuable advice. Thank you for sharing that, Jeremy. This is coming from a man who's run thousands of experiments. So listen to this guy. Shawn, we're coming up on the hour here, and I want to be respectful of time. We have some questions to answer, but yeah, please do add your input.
Yeah, no, just on that, whatever system you use, keep the receipts. So to what Jeremy is saying, it doesn't matter what system, build one, use it, but make sure all of that data is there for you to reference in the future backwards. It's very easy if a test hits QA or a test hits a point where you can't launch it, to forget the calories that you put in for that test. So if you're looking at something and you're like, hey, we're going to do 7 tests this month or 8 tests or whatever, and that's your caloric output, and you do 4 tests that aren't run, you still built 8 tests. You just didn't launch 4. If you don't have a way to have those receipts to go to your client or to go to your boss and be like, yeah, I get it. You wanted 8, we launched 4. Here's the reason why. Now you're dealing with feelings and communication, and you're just in a quagmire. So whatever system, it doesn't matter what system you use, just make sure it has the receipts from the past so you can follow it along the line.
So important. And Shawn and I have had a separate discussion specifically about receipts, and it's sort of an analogy for showing all the actions that you've taken to do the test and all the outcomes of it. And that's really important to be able to justify the expenditure and the work that's put in, and, you know, potentially even be able to automate things in the future. So that's a really great point. Shawn, Jeremy, and Sophie, this has been, I think, a remarkable discussion. So much important knowledge that you shared from your own experience from running, probably collectively between the 4 of us, tens of thousands of tests at this point. So I hope the audience has felt they've done something out of it, and this can be immediately applied to your own testing practice. We're coming up on the hour, but we do have a few questions that I want to ask and get answered. They're sort of random, they're all over the place. And Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. Somebody's asking, how do you use sequential stats for your programs? Or are you only doing it for big experimentation programs or any? And do you cut off tests a lot because of those stats?
Yeah, good question. It's hard to answer that on short timelines, but I will say that like this is only for low traffic sites is what we're quoting for this. If you have enough traffic, run experiments, run scientifically structured experiments. When you have if you only have 12,000 visitors a month, you just can't do that, right? So in that environment, in a B2B SaaS environment, which we work a lot of those type of companies too, then you're just going to have to take a different approach, right? So we can look at impact, but we can't draw definitive conclusions around that. So I want to be very particular. I'm still a data scientist. I'm not saying throw that all out the window. I'm just saying in an environment where you're constrained, research and optimization is still valuable. That's the main point I was trying to get across.
Okay, fantastic. And Alexandra's is wondering, this is open for any of you, do you think giving A/B test analysis to business teams is a good idea, and why or why not?
The more data and insights that you share, the more buy-in you will get for A/B testing, regardless of what those insights are. So yes, like evangelize, the term we always use in CRO, which is, kind of cheesy, is evangelizing results, evangelizing insights, having documentation that can be shared through easily. Documentation is boring. Nobody wants to do that, but we are experts in documentation because that's how we get buy-in. That's how we create excitement. That's how we extrapolate insights to be activated in different parts of the customer journey, because we myopically focus on A/B testing just being about websites, but it's also about search, social, organic content. It's also about the sales process. It's all about customer service and client success. We can take insights from any part of the customer journey and activate those in any other part of the customer journey. So the more that you have a hub of insights and you're pushing insights out to as many stakeholders and business functions as you can, you're going to drive more value from this. And that's a positive thing that you should be doing.
Absolutely. And it really speaks to creating a culture of experimentation as well. So such an important point. The audience, if you have other questions that you're looking to ask, looking to get answered, now is your time. You may also be wondering about what A/B testing platform or tool you should be using going forward.
If you like that video and you want some more, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, send me a carrier pigeon, hit me pager 911-123, maybe an email from Hotmail, hit me on MySpace, whatever you got to do. Let me know you need more of these videos in your life. Automate to win. Let's go.